August 25, 1944, Allied Supreme Headquarters, France. General Dwight D. Eisenhower has a problem that no amount of air power or armor can solve. His armies are moving faster than anyone planned. Patton's Third Army and the First Army are sprinting across France at up to 75 miles a day, faster than any mechanized force in history had ever advanced, and every mile they gain is a mile further from the only port still feeding them. The French rail network, the one system that could have kept pace, is wrecked. Allied bombers spent the spring methodically destroying it to keep German reinforcements from reaching Normandy, and now that same wreckage is strangling the armies it was built to protect. There are no working bridges, there are no running trains, there is no rail line from the beaches to the front. There is only one thing left that can move 12,000 tons of fuel, food, and ammunition a day across 300 miles of broken French countryside. Trucks, and there are not nearly enough of them. Eisenhower would later put it plainly. The supply service had to chase a front line that kept getting further away, and every mile the army advanced doubled the distance a truck had to drive to deliver the next load and get back for another. Patton's tanks were running on fumes in the most literal sense available to a general. Without fuel, the Third Army was not an army. It was several thousand parked tanks. Somebody had to solve this in days, not months. The answer that got built in less than 48 hours would haul more supplies, save more lives, and decide more of the campaign in Northern Europe than almost anything that gets remembered from it. And the men who made it happen were men the United States Army did not believe were capable of combat. This is the story of the Red Ball Express. It is the story of a convoy system that started as a desperate improvisation and became one of the largest trucking operations in human history. And it is the story of why 3 out of every 4 men who drove it were black soldiers, assigned to that job specifically because the Army had decided they were not fit for anything else. It starts not with a general, but with 2 staff officers nobody outside the Transportation Corps has ever heard of. Lieutenant Colonel Loren A. Ayres and Major Gordon K. Gravel were given 36 hours to solve Eisenhower's problem. The Army's pre-war planning had assumed it would need 240 truck companies to keep an advancing force supplied across France, most of them equipped with heavy 10-ton flatbed trailers. When the invasion actually happened, the Army had authorized 160 truck companies, and most of those were stocked not with the heavy trailers the planners wanted, but with the standard GMC 2.5-ton cargo truck, the one soldiers called the Jimmy, or the 6x6. There was a shortfall of both vehicles and drivers, and there was no time to requisition either one through normal channels. So Ayres and Gravel did something the pre-war Army had never planned for. They raided everyone. Infantry units, artillery battalions, anti-aircraft crews, any outfit with a spare truck and a spare body were stripped of both. Soldiers with 2 weeks of nothing to do but wait in a Normandy staging camp were handed 3 hours of driving instruction and put behind the wheel of a 6x6 they had never touched before. One of them, a field artillery scout named Philip A. Dick, said everybody was stripping gears at first, but by the time they got back to their company area, they could make the trucks go. That was the entire qualification standard. Could you make the truck go? On August 25, 1944, the system went live with the name Red Ball Express, borrowed from an old railroad term for freight that had to move immediately and without delay. By the 4th day of operation, it had already grown to 132 truck companies, running nearly 6,000 vehicles. On August 29 alone, those trucks delivered 12,342 tons of supplies in a single day, a record the operation never matched again in the 14 weeks that followed, because nothing about what they were doing was sustainable, and they did it anyway for 82 straight days. The numbers, once you start adding them up, stop sounding like logistics and start sounding like an industrial event. Roughly 23,000 drivers and mechanics ran the route at any given time. At its peak, around 900 fully loaded vehicles were on the road at once, around the clock, in both directions, on a one-way loop highway reserved exclusively for red ball traffic, and guarded at every intersection by military police whose entire job was making sure a red ball truck never had to stop for anything. The round trip from the port at Cherbourg to the forward supply triangle near Chartres was nearly 400 miles and took 54 hours, 2 drivers per truck, trading off so the vehicle itself never rested. Regulations called for 25 miles an hour and 60-yard intervals between trucks. In practice, drivers left the depot the moment they were loaded and ran the open stretches well above 60 miles an hour, headlights off in blackout conditions, navigating by small blackout lights the men called cat's eyes. By the time the operation shut down on November 16, 1944, after the port of Antwerp finally opened, the Red Ball Express had hauled more than 412,000 tons of fuel, ammunition, and equipment to 28 divisions. A 5th Armored Division tank driver said it without any embellishment at all. If it wasn't for the Red Ball, he said, they couldn't have moved. They would have been sitting in their tanks, praying for the trucks to show up. What almost never makes it into that story is who was driving. Nearly 3 out of every 4 Red Ball drivers were black soldiers. That was not an accident of assignment. It was policy. The Army of 1944 was rigidly segregated, and most of its commanders did not believe black soldiers belonged in combat. So black troops were routed, by deliberate decision, into the jobs the Army considered support work: the motor pool, the mess hall, the laundry. The irony nobody planned for is that the support job turned out to be the one the entire campaign actually depended on. Black soldiers were rallying that same year behind something called the Double V campaign, a push by black newspapers like the Pittsburgh Courier for victory over fascism abroad and victory over racism at home. And the Red Ball Express became, without anyone in command intending it, a daily demonstration of exactly that argument. The job was not safe, and it was not simple driving. James Rookard, 19 years old, from Maple Heights, Ohio, remembered seeing trucks blown apart and dead horses and dead men along the roadside after bombing runs. He said he was scared the whole time, 4,000 miles from home, and he did his job anyway and hoped for the best. Drivers fought off hijackers trying to steal cargo for the black market. They dealt with German prisoners of war used as labor to fuel the trucks, who sometimes deliberately let water get into the gas lines, sabotage that a 6x6 driver had to diagnose himself, alone, on a blacked-out road at 2 in the morning, with no help coming. The trucks carried fuel, ammunition, rations, spare parts. And on the way back they carried something else: spent shell casings, used jerry cans, and sometimes the bodies of American soldiers killed at the front, because there was no other transport available to bring them back. The men who depended on those trucks knew exactly what they were watching. An American Armored Division commander said the Red Ball drivers delivered gas under constant fire and that he wouldn't want their job for anything, that they had what it took. General George S. Patton, a man not known for handing out praise to anyone, said the 2.5-ton truck was the most valuable weapon his army had. Colonel John D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander's own son, who served in the war, put it in the plainest terms available to a soldier. Without the Red Ball truck drivers, he said, the advance across France could not have been made. That sentence is the whole reversal of this story. Not the tanks, not the fighter planes, not even the generals whose names fill the history books. A 2-day improvised plan, built by 2 staff officers nobody remembers, executed by 23,000 men the Army had decided weren't capable of combat. 3 out of 4 of them, black soldiers, driving an unarmored truck at 60 miles an hour through blackout conditions, on roads the enemy was still shelling. The German army they were racing against never solved this problem. A typical German infantry division in 1944 still relied on roughly 10 times as many horses as motor vehicles, running on oats instead of gasoline, a logistics system built for the previous war. The United States solved it with a truck, a teenager from Ohio, and 36 hours of planning. That gap, more than any single tank battle, is why one army kept advancing across France in the autumn of 1944, and the other could not. The Red Ball Express ended on November 16, 1944, and the men who drove it went back to their regular units, mostly without medals, mostly without their names in any newspaper. The army made a movie about it in 1952. It used white actors. The men who actually drove those trucks went home and stayed largely out of the record they had personally written into the ground with 60,000 miles of tire tracks across France. Their names belong there anyway. James Rookard, Philip Dick, the drivers of the 666th Quartermaster Truck Company, the men of the 783rd Military Police Battalion who waved them through. If a truck like theirs is what closes the gap between an army that can advance and an army that cannot, then the men who drove it earned a place in this story that history has been slow to give them. If you stayed with this one to the end, a like keeps it visible to the people who still don't know this story. Subscribe if you want the next one. Their names belong in the record. That is why we tell these stories.